Sam, thank
So
you
first,
oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I was just gonna say exactly what you were saying. Thank you so much for having us. This is really a big honor for us to be coming to speak at this conference. So thank you, Sam, for the invite.
Definitely. So we'll start off with some introductions. I am LaTonya Berryhill, and I am the interim managing director for the Michigan Institute for Clinical and Health Research, as well as our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Program lead. Mark?
And I'm Mark Cantrell. I work with LaTonya. I work as a research development specialist and also a grant editor for our department.
And we are so excited to be here with you today. We just want to share a little background information on how we even got to where we are today. So Mark, if you want to go to the next slide. When 6 years ago, the University of Michigan started an initiative to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion across the campus. Really an intention to make diversity, equity, and inclusion part of our fabric and to make everyone feel like they belonged. And so that initiative really started off with a lot of focus groups, a lot of trainings, and while our department was doing the trainings, a couple of things came up. One, we were told that it feels checkboxy, like we're just checking a box. We're going to these trainings, but what's next? And then the other thing is that I was meeting with one of our former colleagues who told me that our department was already diverse enough, that we didn't need to be doing these trainings. And it took me a moment, to be honest, and I thanked her. I said, thank you so much. And I'm so happy that that's where you are. But what we have to also think about is, where is everyone else? And how do we meet people where they are? I think it's very important to realize that we're all on this journey, but we're at different points. And so really thinking about, outside of the trainings, what are some of the other things that we could be doing? So we did a journal club, and we had what's called DEI talks, where people can just kind of come and we talk about different hot topics. But I think the piece for us that was missing was, how do we engage people? How do we bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to life? And we really started talking about storytelling and providing a space where people could volunteer to tell their lived stories. And I think that's really where we started to lean in to some of those uncomfortable conversations. Mark, is there anything you want to add?
No, I just want to reiterate what you had said. It's really important for us as a department and institution that we started to move away from some of those checkboxy type trainings and allow people to start actually having those difficult conversations and modeling it in our department. So hopefully we're moving away from trainings and we're actually doing the work that we're talking about.
Thank you, Mark. So this slide is just an overview of the Becoming series that Mark and I kind of came up with. And it's really an opportunity for us to learn about our colleagues, to really think about each other in a way outside of how we see each other working on a project or running through the office, right? To really pause and listen. Pause and understand, what has someone's life journey been? And so through this Becoming series, we've had the opportunity to hear from about 18 members of our team. And we've heard different impact stories around immigration, around mental health, around disabilities that we can't see, around how healthcare in many situations, we don't always remember that. If you tell me that one of the symptoms I'm going to have is that my skin is going to yellow, I'm not going to see the yellowing of my skin. So what are some of the other symptoms that I would see? So we had someone who really talked about their healthcare journey. We've had people talk about what it's like to be the only, people coming out to their families. I think we've heard from one of our colleagues on his family's journey. They're Jewish, and so really he provided us some background information. And so we've had the privilege in many ways to take a deeper look and understanding of who our colleagues are as individual people. Mark, anything you want to add?
I actually did one of these becoming series. LaTonya and I were one of the first to kind of model it for our department. And while I feel like a very open book type of person, it did feel a little awkward at first to kind of talk about my more personal stories in front of my colleagues. But I will say after I did it, it was a very like liberating feeling. And I did have people come up to me after that said like, they were asking questions to me that felt like second nature to me, but to them it was, a first experience or encounter for them. So, I mean, it really brings home that power of storytelling and really opening people up to new experiences that they may not encounter on an everyday basis like you do.
Yeah, I agree. I went first and I was a nervous wreck, right? Because in the office, you really want to look professional and you want to seem like you've got it all together. And there were parts of my story that really I had to lean into and be willing to say, okay, it's okay to share that I'm not the professional person when I leave this space. And so how do I help others understand that?
Yeah.
Mark, you want to go to the next slide? Mark, do you want to kick this slide off?
Yeah, so when we talk about the impact of storytelling, we're again talking about how we're taking that training from a training book or a training PowerPoint and how we bring that out of the training scenario. And the impact of storytelling can go in many different ways. So when we're talking about getting to know our coworkers on a completely different level, this is one of the most impactful ways that I've seen people be able to tell their stories because it's coming right from them. And they're not talking about other people's stories or other things that happened outside of their lived experience. It's coming straight from them. So we're hearing, a raw account of some personal experiences that we don't really might not have any familiarity with. So for me, the impact of storytelling really just takes that diversity, equity, and inclusion component that much further. And we're getting different aspects or different perspectives of these diversity stories in told in new ways. LaTonya, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I think great point, Mark. I think some of the other impact is that we've been able to make improvements around our office, right? So we had one colleague who talked about how she has a difficult time seeing her screen. And so after her becoming story, I was like, why don't we get you a larger screen, right? Because for me as the office manager, I was like, oh, that's something that I can help. I can fix, right? I can make it easier for her at work. And so maybe I would have learned that or maybe not, but I was really appreciative of the fact that we were able to learn it through her story and that we were able to get her a larger monitor, and then it makes it easier for her to do her job. And so I think
Yeah,
it's a personal impact, but it's also how can we make things better at work as well. Sorry, Mark.
no, I'm sorry. Going off of that, I think we've incorporated storytelling not only in our diversity, equity, inclusion programs, but in the way we facilitate research development. So we have a participant recruitment unit in our department that has recently really started to lean into that storytelling aspect of research. So they started interviewing research participants at our university and found out that during our participant for research intake process, we don't really ask any questions related to sexual orientation or LGBTQ related personality things. So our participant recruitment team actually adopted a whole new process for research participants to kind of tell their sexual orientation, their pronouns, more experiences around LGBTQ related scenarios so that when we're doing research projects and we're looking for participants, we're able to get that much more granular with who we're inviting to research projects.
Great point, Mark. Thank you. One of the last pieces that we wanted to talk about before we opened it up for questions is creating psychologically safe spaces. One of the things that was really important, and I think one of the reasons that this works in our department, is because we have created these spaces. There's trust within our department, right? There's trust that people aren't going to be judged for their stories, and that we're really embracing people and their stories. I think there's awareness, there's self-awareness. I think we've just been able to create this space where people feel safe enough to tell these stories. And I think that's the other reason that we've asked people to volunteer. We don't normally ask anyone, will they do this? We just leave it to them to tell us, hey, I'm in a space in my life where I want to tell my story and share it with others. Mark, anything you want to add?
No, I think that you pretty much summed it up well. Usually LaTonya or I are the ones who facilitate these becoming sessions, and LaTonya and I definitely make sure to check in with the person prior to a session to make sure they know that we have their back 100% during the session. Let them know that if there's anything uncomfortable, any off-topic questions that they don't want anything to do with, LaTonya and I make sure to let them know that we'll step in and kind of safe house them.
Yeah, and I think that is so important. And then the other piece is that we check in with them afterwards, right? Because it can be heavy, right? After you tell that story. And so we make sure we're like, how's it going? How are you feeling? Is there anything that we could do for the next person that might make them feel a little more comfortable? And so really hearing from the individuals who have shared their stories has helped us improve the program. And we've recently, the program is rolling out across Michigan Medicine and different parts of the university. So we also have created a evaluation that will now go with it so that we can hear from not only the individuals sharing their stories, but the people attending. How did that feel for you? Was anything triggering? Because we want to make sure that we're creating a safe space for everyone in attendance. Mark, anything you want to add?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
All right, so we're happy to take any questions that anyone has. I think, Mark, we can go to full gallery view. We can stop sharing so that we can actually hear and see the people. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
So interesting. Thank you very much. James has put a comment in the chat saying that it reminded him of the Human Library projects, and I was thinking that as well. But of course, I suppose that's much more of a one-to-one discussion, I think, isn't it? Whereas what yours is a more sort of almost a team building type space, isn't it? Really, perhaps. Would you describe it like that?
Yeah, so oh, sorry, Mark.
I was just going to say, I'm not familiar with Human Library, so.
Yeah, so as we have an anti-racism oversight committee at Michigan Medicine, and so my subcommittee is actually opportunities for conversation. So we've just started exploring the Human Library, and I was able to be part of a mini one, and I think it is a little different, but very similar. I did feel the same kind of ability to, one, be in a safe space, two, to understand someone's story, and to three, to be able to ask some questions. But I think both of them are very similar, yeah.
Yeah, and I can see Mads has posted in the chat. It's big in Denmark, apparently. Yeah. There's a question from Afira. Have you considered using playback theatre? I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is?
No, I'm not familiar.
I'm not familiar.
Afira, can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you. It's really an amazing thing, actually, in which there is like a troupe of actors and a director of the theater and a musician playing violin or something like that. And they go around the crowd and they ask the crowd like things like, okay, what did you do today, or things like that, and people tell them, and then they improvise a performance. And I got acquainted with this genre because I was interested in disaster risk reduction and traumatizing experiences. And actually, if you look for, how is it called, Playback Theater and 9/11 in YouTube, you will find this amazing performance in which they go in the crowd in one of the memorials of 9/11 a few years ago, and they ask the audience to tell them what, where have you been, when the planes crashed into the Twin Towers, and people tell them and they enact it. And there was one of the people in the audience was actually a part of the tragedy and the disaster. And it was so touching to see them perform and to see her kind of shedding tears. And it's like aestheticizing those very difficult experiences, not just telling them on a personal level, when a group of performers perform what you tell them of your difficult experiences. It's very powerful, I thought. And also
that sounds very powerful.
Yeah, and it's actually uplifts, from that very personal level. When it becomes a performance, it becomes something that others can better identify with and not just kind of, judge, or you don't just explore your own vulnerability, which is precisely, the safe environment that you want to create. It's more than that. It becomes an aesthetic experience for everybody to kind of explore.
I really like that. I think the idea of making it a performance that is improvised in the moment, I think that sounds super powerful.
I agree. It's great.
Yeah.
I have to look it up.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that.
I can send a link to the YouTube if I find it quickly.
Yeah, that'd be great. I also definitely interested in looking more into the human library.
Yeah. So can I ask you, if you're rolling it out now to other departments, I mean, it sounds to me like it's such a wonderful thing to do, but there is there's quite a risk involved. Are you managing to sort of not get stressed about that?
There's definitely a risk involved, right? There's a risk. We not only are telling our stories, but then at the end, we allow people to ask us questions about our lives. And so I think there is a risk. And one of the things that we always talk to any department about is your department ready? We really ask that question, is your department ready? Because not every department is ready, right? Like it's a journey. We're all on an individual journey. And then as an institution, we're also on a journey. So we do some evaluation and really talk to the people who are interested to make sure that one, are people going to volunteer? Because if no one volunteers, then there are no stories. And two, once people do start to volunteer, are they truly going to be accepted for who they are once the session is over, right? Do they get to go back and continue to be like who they were before that story at work? And so I think there's a risk involved, and we want to make sure that departments are ready to roll it out. And so we do have our IT department actually rolled it out in 2020, and they've also had about 19 people do the sessions, and it's one of the highest rated DEI sessions that they do as well, because I think really people want to learn more, right? It's an opportunity to learn more.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's a huge number. I can imagine it probably is quite a snowball thing that once a few people have spoken, others would feel empowered to come forwards and share as well, I would think. I don't know, I've got more questions, but I don't know, can somebody else stop me and ask a question? I don't know if anyone wants to come in.
I came in a bit late, but I can perhaps do something. The thing is, I do get the risk of it all and all that, but I do think it's very much a cost-benefit thing, that if you get the right people who are willing to share themselves, you can really challenge your prejudice in the work environment. But the thing is, you got to make it a safe space first. That's the challenge of it. But also to create a safe space, that's the weird thing. You also got to first have some vulnerability and have everything to it. So perhaps doing some sort of exercise where everybody is sort of made willingly vulnerable creates more of a safe space to accomplish this effect.
Yeah, I think that's important to note that it's like the steps that you label definitely have to happen in that order in some form or fashion, because none of these becoming sessions would go the way that they have without that psychological safety. And then none of that psychological safety would have happened in our department without having vulnerable conversations first to get people in that psychological safety. So that's totally a good point.
And
What
I
do you
think
do to facilitate that? Sorry.
No, you're good. I can just share. I think a lot of that for our department started in our journal club. Our journal club was one of the first non-training things that we did. And I think it started off with just a couple people, and we got to read the journal, and we got to start saying, oh, well, I can relate to that because of X, Y, and Z. And then as the journal club grew, more people were able to kind of find their voice and feel like they belonged in a space. And so I think through some of our earlier things that we did, it allowed us to get to the point where we are now. And our Becoming series is one of two series, and Mark, you can add that I feel like that we do, where we really are so leaning into spaces that may be uncomfortable. We also have a series called Bold Conversations with Co-Conspirators, and that really has been another opportunity to go a little deeper. One of those sessions, we talked about trauma related to racial slurs and how that impacts someone for their entire life. And so I think we've done a pretty good job at slowly kind of getting to the place that we are, but we also realize that we have to evaluate. Are we still in a space where we're all about, learning more and being in that difficult conversation, or do we need to kind of step back and do a training? And so I think we've been able to kind of go back and forth between the two, and definitely talking to the team to say, where are you? What do you want us to be doing right now? Mark, anything you want to add?
I mean, sometimes we've done sessions where we've started a conversation and realized that there's interest to take it further. So we develop a follow-up program to really not just touch the surface, but really start having conversations.
It's been a journey. I mean, it's definitely been a 5-year journey of getting to where we are now.
Can I just ask, so it's fabulous that they've got you to sort of facilitate this. So which part of the organization is resourcing the activity? Is it the equality angle? I'm just thinking, because we've got people here from lots of institutions.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
So we've created like a kind of protocol document that we pass to departments who are trying to put this on. But again, that's really hard to do because every environment, every department is going to be different in what their needs are and what their comfort is for being ready to do a Becoming. So, I mean, you asked in terms of quality, keeping it, I assume keeping it kind of standardized throughout it, which I mean, is something LaTonya and I have talked about a lot. And it's hard because we start creating these documents and we're like, well, we don't want to be too specific, but then we don't want to be too broad either. So it really is a balancing act.
Yeah. Yes, I bet.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the tools that our anti-racism oversight committee is encouraging departments to use. But I often challenge, and I'm on that committee, right? But I often challenge, are we ready? And do we have the safeguards in place in that department to do it? And so I think we really do have to look at it case by case, department by department.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've just got so many questions. Joanna, go on, you ask a question.
It's a tiny follow-up actually to that. So you go to departments and you pose these questions to them. And do you yourselves have do you have a safeguard for yourselves where you have a mechanism for turning around and saying, I'm really sorry, even though you think you're ready, you're not ready. I'm not prepared to bring this into your space. How do you negotiate? That feels like quite a difficult space to negotiate. Do you have any, or maybe you never have, but.
So at Michigan Medicine, we have diversity, equity, inclusion leads across the institution. So we have about 115 DEI leads. And so normally the individuals that we're talking to are our DEI leads in the beginning. So they're normally the ones that will reach out and say, hey, we want to do this in our department. And so we do ask, like, what trainings have you done? What activities have you done? So we'll try to dig a little bit to find out what they've already done, right? Because you don't want to walk in and this is the first thing that you're doing in your department. And so there was one lead who reached out to me and I was like, I just don't know if your department is ready. Let's do X, Y, and Z to get you all ready. And so providing some other ideas and some suggestions for them on how they could get to the space where they were ready. But I think it is important that we do evaluate, and we're not going to be able to say no to every department, right? Some departments are just going to do it. And we just have to hope for the best. What I always tell people is you don't want to cause harm. You don't want to trigger anything. And so that's why I really appreciate when the leads are reaching out ahead of time to really talk through, like, are we ready? Is it time for us to do that? And I feel like, you know, that is part of what, as an institution, we're also saying is like, we want to make sure that your department is ready to do this.
Yeah. Handled very tactfully. Do you ever feel like, I mean, because obviously it sounds to me like the conversations happen within the space of the team. Do you ever think about capturing some of the stories like more as sort of standalone resources, or would that completely miss the point of doing it? I suspect maybe it would.
So our ITS team actually does record. They don't call it becoming, they call it our story, and they do record it so that others within their department can go back and watch them. We've not done it in our department. I think only one person has requested that we recorded it for them, and we did honor that. I've done a couple sessions on the main campus where we did record it. And so we really leave it up to the individual. Do you want this recorded or not? I think it's really up to that person to say where they are with that, but I normally don't ask people if they want to record it.
Yeah, it comes with its own complications, doesn't it, once you start, recording things.
And we never want to freeze people in time, right? My story yesterday is totally different than my story today. And so I don't want anyone to look at that video and be like, oh, that's who she is, right? It was who I was in that moment. I might be a completely different I told my becoming story in 2019. I'm going to tell it again later on this year to a different group. It's probably going to be a completely different story just based on what we've gone through over the last couple of years.
Yeah, look, you can see everyone nodding. Such a good point. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has just been amazing. I'm really conscious of time. I don't know if anyone else wants to ask anything, leap in quickly. But it's just been fabulous hearing what you're doing. And I think so, for me, who's obviously sat through the whole of the conference, because I've had to, it resonates with so many things that we've had, previous discussions and talks. I think it's just like a fabulous example of how that can play out at a very local level. So just massive thank you, LaTonya and Mark, for coming and speaking to us today. And we've recorded the session so we can make that available within the to attendees who couldn't make it, because lots of people were asking, including some of our people from our DEI team as well. We're very keen to see it. So thank you for letting us do that.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure to be here, and definitely if there's anything that we can do as follow-up, if anyone thinks of any questions, we're happy to answer any follow-up questions. And then Sam, you have the recording that you're welcome to share with people who have already told their stories. And so they talk about why they told their stories. And so you're welcome to share that, or the abstract as well.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. Right, I'm going to just stop recording now.